Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, especially the press, members of the MOH team. My name is Howard Lynch. I'll be chairing this session. And this session is really a press conference to look at the status of the Cornwall Regional Hospital. And as you see from the program, we will proceed with welcome and opening remarks from the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jacqueline Bissesa-McKenzie. That will be followed by the main address by the Minister of Health, the Honorable Christopher Tufta. And after that, we will take questions. And the Minister will provide the answers, and Dr. Bissesa as well. So, Dr. Bissesa, over to you.
All right, so let's just try and shift it up a little bit and let me give the initial opening remarks, if you don't mind. First of all, thank you very much for attending this very short notice press briefing, and as it relates to the agenda that was outlined, we're also open to your questions and queries that you may have. I'd also like to say, don't worry about the parking tickets. We'll find a way to sort it out, okay? All right. As you know, a lot has been discussed in recent times in the media around the issue of Cornwall Regional Hospital. And just by way of context, a couple of things I'd like to say. First of all, Cornwall Regional Hospital is one of 3 Type A hospitals in the country, the other 2 being Kingston Public and the University of the West Indies. And in very simple form, the designation of a Type A institution means that it has advanced services, tertiary level services, that the Type B or C or below would not have. In other words, it is a facility providing public health services to all Jamaicans, and in particular in the 4 or so parishes of Western Jamaica, Hanover, Westmoreland, Falmouth, and of course St. James, but others too, but at least those. Services that would not have been available at the hospitals that were in those areas, in those parishes. So it's a very important institution as it relates to public health in those parts. So that's one, and I think it's important as part of the frame of reference. The second critical point is that Cornwall Regional Hospital, unfortunately, has been plagued for a very long period of time with air quality issues. The building was built some 45 years ago. It took a few years, by a gift of the Canadian government, a design that was done by them, and we're very grateful for that contribution. And it comes with particular features which requires certain levels of maintenance, which I'm prepared to say did not take place over the years since the establishment of the facility. As far back as 1999-2000, there were significant issues related to air quality. In fact, I am told that the extraction system was shut down, or at least in sections of the facility, because of those issues. Since 2008, just to reinforce the point, there have been some 16 attempts, 16 expressions of concern as it relates to the air quality issues at Cornwall. Documented expressions of concerns related to air quality issues in different parts of the building. So this is not a yesterday problem. It's not a last year problem. Indeed, I'm prepared to say it's a more than decade-old problem that the institution has had, and largely because of maintenance issues. When the problem emerged, just not taking the care and time to deal with it officially and properly. So backtrack now to the most recent incident, which is the September 2016. I had these complaints through the management of the institution, through to the ministry. And we immediately decided to take the necessary action to deal with the complaints. Firstly, by determining where these air quality issues exist and what were the causes of the air quality issues that were creating the irritation for the medical staff and patients. We brought in external environmental specialists, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind calling their name, Environmental Solutions. We also combined them with our own local environmental personnel. We do have an environmental unit here in the ministry. And those air quality issues were determined to be a couple of things. They were determined to be pollutants from spilt chemicals in the X-ray room, which contaminated the walls and vents of the ventilation system, which resulted in the toxic fumes, for want of a better phrase. It eventually led to an attempt at cleaning those vents, which led to fiberglass particles. These are what the test results were showing. Fiberglass particles being put out in the atmosphere and adding to the irritation of those persons working in that environment. Each time we determined that these parts of the hospital, because it's not the entire hospital that was affected, those areas that were, we attempted to do the necessary deep cleaning, relocate where we had to relocate in order to try and understand the issue and to deal with the issue. PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, played a role also in that we consulted with them from time to time, leading to a report that they generated back in March of 2017, which identified, among the other issues that I outlined, the presence of mold in the building. Now, I'm going to leave the technical discussion around mold to the Chief Medical Officer, because I think it's something that should be addressed. But just to give the generalities of the process, once the mold issue was discovered, and by the way, it was discovered in some parts of the building, not the entire building, and it was discovered in different concentrated levels and indeed different varieties. Again, CMO will comment as it relates to mold, what it is, and what the different distinctions are in terms of concentration and so on, and likely impact. What I will say, however, is that having received that report in March, immediate action was taken, firstly, to remove persons who were in that general vicinity, or at least minimize access to those general areas. And secondly, to engage the services of experts, external experts, to engage in mold remediation or removal. And that process took a few weeks or so. The CMO will give some better particulars on the details. But those persons were engaged. They were brought in, and they immediately engaged in the process of mold remediation. And I make that point and want to stress that point because there is a sentiment being expressed out there, erroneously so, inaccurately so, that the management and the ministry kept persons in an environment that placed them at risk, and we willingly did it, and we were negligent as a consequence. And I just want to say that that is not the case, in that action was taken immediately and persons were relocated from the critically affected areas. And I'll repeat again that while this was found, it was not in the entire building. So the areas that were worst affected, because the test did reveal concentrated levels. So there are some that are at levels that are not considered to be serious, and others that we felt was serious enough to take the appropriate action. I'll go further. The building was built during the time when asbestos was an important material, building material, used in many construction projects. And there was a removal exercise some years back. But one area, granted a closed off area, a kitchen that was no longer in use and was closed off, was found to have asbestos still in that part of the building. We immediately engaged the services of experts and remove that particular contaminant while we were doing the demolding. So the point is that we acted, as far as we are concerned, responsibly in taking action once the knowledge was there that these contaminants existed and required action to be taken. And we believe very strongly that that was the best course of action at that point in time. Now, I want to just quickly address the issue of to close or not to close, because I know that that has been a discussion point also. Once we determined that there were air quality issues, we looked at the contingencies that existed in terms of the relocation of patients. And those contingencies were engaged to the extent that it was practically possible to do the relocation. In fact, by March, when we had that first comprehensive PAHO report, I believe there were only 200 or so beds in the building at the time. In other words, we had relocated a number of services. We had the Western Seventh-day Adventist Conference Center next door in terms of outpatient clinics. We had taken many of the labs and placed them on the external of the building. We had relocated the Mount Salem Clinic, or converted it into accident and emergency. And that process has been an ongoing effort, recognizing two things. One, the discomfort within the building and the need to do something about it, particularly on the part of nurses and doctors. But two, the need for the overhaul or renovation of the building, which, frankly speaking, with people inside, patients or medical staff, would be very difficult because of the nature of the work that needed to be done. So it was always a part of the program to relocate as best as we could in order to deal with the renovation that was needed, the assessment and renovation. Okay, it's a lot of work, having discovered the mold in the building. The challenge is that there were some services that just could not be relocated in a short time or short notice. We had to renovate, well, firstly innovate and then renovate, to find places where we could create an environment to provide those services before we actually did the relocation. The alternative to that would be to shut down and have nowhere to go. And having nowhere to go would literally mean lives being lost during that period because of the important nature of the institution, which I stated earlier, the only Type A facility in that part of the country. So fast forward to this past weekend. Today I can say that we have engaged a process of relocation that has led to us now having no inpatients in the facility. So the remaining 100 beds that existed in the facility up to a week ago have now been relocated. Outpatient has always been on the external, next door. We have relocated 33 of 38 services that are offered by the hospital. And yes, it has taken us a year to do it. Frankly speaking, we had to engage in a number of activities in order to facilitate that relocation. So for example, today, Cornwall Regional's elective surgery services are now being offered at Falmouth Hospital in Trelawney. What did we have to do to achieve that? We had to renovate 2 additional operating theaters. So they now have 4. They had 2 before. 2 were built for World Cup cricket, never used, had some deficiencies, air conditioning deficiencies, equipment deficiencies. We had to renovate those. That took time, including bringing stuff from abroad, which we couldn't get locally. 2, we had to build a building. It was an abandoned building. We had to engage the services of architectural work, contractors, and built a building which took many months, which was completed a week ago, and that building now can accommodate 40 beds, as well as relocate another section of the hospital for an additional 20 beds. Falmouth is an 87-bed hospital. We have added 50 beds, which is probably 60% additional capacity for inpatient care, and the 2 operating theaters, and accommodation for the doctors and nurses who have to now relocate from Cornwall. So today, we can now say elective surgeries offered by Cornwall Regional Hospital takes place at the Falmouth Hospital. But it took many months to get there because there wasn't a shelf item called an operating theater or inpatient bed space that we could just purchase and place in that vicinity. I could say the same for a number of the other services, but I'll say for 2 others. The back of the compound, Cornwall Regional Hospital compound, were nurses' quarters. We had to renovate, first of all, relocate, then renovate in order to accommodate 200 beds approximately that are now to the back. So the services of inpatient care at Cornwall takes place to the back of the main building in the quadrant, formerly nurses' accommodation, which had to be renovated to accommodate. I mean, electrical had to go in, hitting out the doorways to make them larger so you can push the beds through, and I could go on. The inpatient care is at Falmouth also. And then a final area for inpatient care, the Mount Salem Clinic, which is now the accident and emergency ward. We have expanded the capacity of the Mount Salem Clinic by adding a new building, which should be completed in another few weeks, which will give significant additional capacity, including an operating theater for accident and emergency, for emergency cases, and bed space for emergency cases. So the campus, the compound, the grounds of Cornwall Regional Activity are abuzz with activity in terms of services being offered. But the main building, which is the building of contention, has been downsized to only provide about 10% of what the building would normally provide. Those services are the linear accelerator, which is the cancer treatment facility, which you can't move because it's a big piece of equipment, the morgue, dialysis, administration, and histology processing records. Those are the 5 that still exist, more on the ground floor. But all the other services have been relocated. And the important point here to note is that it had to take some time because there were no ready alternatives available. And to just shut cold turkey would mean that people would die. I looked at some numbers as it relates to the Mount Salem Clinic now operating as accident and emergency. Over the last 12 months, accident and emergency has seen in excess of 48,000 persons. Surgeries, emergency surgeries, 1,800 plus on the 1,900. Now, for those who don't appreciate what an emergency surgery is, an emergency surgery means if you don't do it quickly, then the prospects of persons surviving are significantly compromised. In other words, they would likely die. Now, for anybody to say that we should shut down and find an alternative without no explanation as to where that alternative is, I'm telling you, we would be here today talking about a different narrative. We'd be here today talking about the thousands or the hundreds that have died because we shut down the facility. It just was not practical. It would not have been the right decision. And frankly speaking, we are still confident that it was the right decision when we decided that it would have to be a gradual process in order to protect the lives of persons who reside and depend on that facility to get their treatment, either in emergency cases or otherwise. Going forward, there are a number of things that we will be doing. I think we are, first of all, we will not likely have the issues that have occurred with the concerns expressed by the medical staff, the nurses in particular, about air quality issues affecting them. And I want to just place on record that I regret thoroughly the fact that staff members, nurses and doctors have had to endure this process of irritation and discomfort and sickness over that period of time. I take no joy in recognizing that reality. And indeed, I really am sorry that they had to go through some of those experiences. The challenge we faced was, how do we balance that issue with the need to provide the critical essential services? And that really was the reality. And I do hope that those who have been affected will be understanding to that reality. Indeed, I believe they are, because they did remain and do what they had to do in terms of providing the critical services that were necessary. And I really want to give them significant recognition and commendation during that period. But we have come to this point now where there's no longer a need for that. The question now is, how do we go forward? And going forward, there are a couple of things that have happened and others that will happen. I think we have assessed thoroughly what the issues are. We have a plan in terms of moving the process forward. I give you some examples. The main issue, the ventilation system, the design has taken place. A contract has been awarded for a manufacturer of the system. It's not a shelf item. And that is now in train. And then there will be the installation, having completed that process. That's a large item, over $500 million. The leaking roof, and the replacement of pipes, the redesign of the floors, because a number of the floors have been totally gutted. The architectural work, the technical work is taking place to achieve those targets. And you would have heard that there are some review processes taking place in terms of the management structure, the management arrangement of the process. And that will continue over the next few weeks to try and get the right balance in terms of not just managing the logistics of administering care, but managing the project through to completion, both being absolutely critical. I still feel that we are working towards a target for over a year, looking at the end of this year, give or take a month or two. Again, it's a brownfield site, and things are subject to change. But we believe that we're in a place now where we can provide the services, not risk people's lives in terms of the essential services that they need, while working to restore Cornwall Regional to its rightful place. And I crave the indulgence and the understanding of the public, the Jamaican people, persons in the West, the medical staff, because they still have to go through some inconveniences in terms of the logistics of moving from one place to the next. But it will all be, to my mind, in the interest of restoring Cornwall Regional to where it ought to be. I'm going to ask Dr. Mackenzie now to just address the issue of the mold.
Okay, morning, everyone. I am going to be addressing two issues. Okay, one has to do with our response as a ministry to the exposure of persons within the building, and two, in terms of speaking about the mold itself. First of all, I want to say that the assessment report from PAHO was dated March the 23rd, 2017. So the ministry would have been aware of this report sometime in April, and of the findings in keeping with a damp building. But prior to the results, and as a matter of fact, prior to the assessments that were being done, there were complaints related to air quality issues in the recovery room and the intensive care unit, there were several attempts at repairing the air conditioning systems. Efforts were already being put in place to decrease the number of staff in these areas and the time spent in the areas for both staff and patients. As early as March the 8th, 2017, an operating table was removed from Cornwall Regional Hospital and placed at Falmouth Hospital so that elective cases could have been done there. And from March the 4th, 2017, operations on the 5th floor, where the intensive care unit and the recovery room are, were considerably reduced as only emergency surgeries were being done. So the spaces were being used less. At that time, the intensive care unit was closed. That was in March. And the recovery room services were downscaled, and subsequently the area was closed. ICU beds were moved to Falmouth Hospital by April the 5th, 2017, and patients were being admitted there for intensive care treatment. After the results were received in April, discussions were started immediately with a mold abatement expert. The reports had pointed to problems of high humidity favoring mold growth in the areas that were enclosed and that depended on an HVAC system for ventilation. And the areas that were mentioned were on the 4th and the 5th floor. We started immediately to renovate a space on the 4th floor to move the operating theater functions from the 5th to the 4th floor so that the mold abatement could have been facilitated on the 5th floor. Extensive mold abatement commenced on May the 5th. By June the 21st, mold abatement was completed on the 1st floor in radiology and oncology, in the 4th floor in obstetrics and the operating theaters, and on the 5th floor intensive care unit. This allowed completion of the renovation of operating theaters on the 4th floor and facilitated movement of the 5th floor operations to the 4th floor by mid-July. The 5th floor enclosed spaces were all closed and sealed off to allow the mold abatement work to continue there. And during the period April to June, increased cleaning of all spaces, including cleaning of walls and ceilings, were increased to abate further any further mold growth. By the middle of May 2017, the renovations to the staff quadrants to hold patients were completed, and the 8th to the 10th floor were evacuated. The 7th floor on the west side is a naturally ventilated area and was recently renovated. It was used to house the obstetrics unit while mold abatement was being carried out on the 4th floor, and was later used to house the special care nursery when there were increased complaints from that area on the 6th floor. All enclosed areas, therefore, that were found to have mold were therefore extensively cleaned and mold abatement carried out, or the area was abandoned. It must be noted that in none of these areas, except for the recovery room, was there an increase in aerial mold spore counts compared to the external atmosphere. And that area, that is the recovery room, was closed from in March 2017. So that's a summary of our responses that showed that persons were not languishing in the areas that were said to have high mold counts. I just want to speak a little bit about the mold issues. There have been many questions relating to the findings of mold in the Cornwall Regional Hospital building that have caused quite a bit of concern. And the Ministry of Health would like to clarify some of the issues surrounding the perception of the risk that is involved. The question has been asked, should we be concerned about a serious health risk to staff and patients caused by the toxic mold? Now, some molds are toxigenic. That is, they produce mycotoxins. The molds themselves are not toxic or poisonous. Responses produced from exposure to common mold that grow in buildings are the same as that from molds that may produce mycotoxins. Mold pretty much is everywhere. It is in the air, it is on the surfaces, many surfaces in our homes and in our workplaces. it will pretty much grow anywhere that there is moisture. The most common indoor molds are Cladosporum, Penicillium, Aspergillus, and Alternaria. Stachybotrys species, that was noted to be very toxic in the PAHO report, is also found in buildings and homes, but while it is less common than other mold species, it is not rare. Mold spores occur naturally in both the indoor and the outdoor environments. They enter from the outside through doorways, windows, and HVAC systems. Spores in the air also attach themselves to persons and therefore move inside the building. When mold spores drop on spaces where there is excessive moisture, such as where leakage or condensation may have occurred, they will grow. And building materials provide nutrients that cause the mold to grow. So wet cellulose materials, including paper and ceiling tiles, wood, are particularly conducive to mold growth. There is sufficient evidence to link indoor exposure to mold with upper respiratory tract symptoms, cough and wheeze in otherwise healthy people, with asthma symptoms in people with asthma, and with hypersensitivity pneumonitis in individuals that are susceptible to immune-mediated conditions, and with a variety of other symptoms that have been demonstrated in the complaints from persons at Cornwall Regional Hospital. The PAHO assessment of March 2017 showed that there were 9 different types of mold that were detected in the external atmosphere. Of these, 5 were detected in the internal spaces. In 2 areas, the levels internally were higher than the external levels. These were in the recovery room, where Aspergillus and Penicillium-like species were found, and in the obstetrics areas, where Basidospores and Cladosporum species were found. Hyphal and mycelial fragments were also higher than exterior average in those 2 areas. Remember and note that those areas were either abandoned or mold abatement was carried out from as early as March. Now, Stachybotrys, Penicillium, and Aspergillus species are known to produce toxins. Spores of Stachybotrys species were not detected in the air in the areas that were investigated. Aspergillium, Penicillium were detected on the 4th and the 5th floor, but aside from the recovery room, all the levels were lower than the external average. Mold grows in moist spaces on the surfaces where condensation occurs, and therefore it is not surprising that when these areas were swabbed, that mold would have been detected, as was seen on Table 4 of the PAHO document that many of you would have seen. Now, this would also be the case in damp areas in our homes and in the kitchens and in our bathrooms. This points to the fact that the presence of the mold indicated a persistent moisture problem. Molds like Stachybotrys require constant moisture to grow. They grow in slimy conditions and they do not release spores readily. Extensive cleaning and mold abatement was carried out in all these areas. The presence of mold and the resulting symptoms are not indications that toxins are produced. Mycotoxins are not always produced by mold. Most mold that produce toxins will do so slowly, and the toxins are found in higher quantities in the spores. Mycotoxins are harmful to humans and animals when exposure levels are very high. There are no validated studies that have shown that normal indoor exposures poses a significant threat. High exposures are associated with ingestion of food that has been heavily contaminated with mold. Historically, in Europe, Stachybotrys species was found on wet grain used for animal food with severe outcomes. And also illnesses occurred when starving peasants in Eastern Europe as well ate rotting food contaminated with the mold. And most of the negative facts about Stachybotrys came from those reports. Aflatoxins from Aspergillus species has also been implicated in hepatic cancer after ingestion of contaminated grains. Now, a critical review of papers, reports, and studies on Stachybotrys mycotoxins reveal only descriptive reports of suspected animal and human poisoning secondary to consumption of mold-contaminated food products. No studies of good toxicologic or epidemiologic designs answer whether airborne mycotoxins produced by Stachybotrys could produce specific human toxicity. Molds may excrete liquids or volatile gases that produce an odor that is associated with moldy interiors, but does not indicate toxicologically significant exposures. In summary, some people are sensitive to molds. For these people, exposure to molds can lead to a variety of the symptoms mentioned before. Some people, such as those with allergies to mold or with asthma, will have more intense reactions. However, such relationships are with building associated molds comprising many species that colonize wet or damp building materials and are not specific to molds that can produce toxins. Toxic effects are due to overwhelming exposures that are usually as a result of ingestion. There are no proven toxicologically significant effects from inhalation of mycotoxins. Removal of exposure will result in resolution of symptoms in most cases. Some persons may develop chronic symptoms, and continued follow-up of these persons will be required to determine whether further investigation is indicated. Chronic fungal infections or presence of toxins can be determined with appropriate investigations if it is indicated.
Now you know why I didn't do that report, right? It takes a medical mind to sort of give you that kind of, or a trained scientific mind to give you that kind of assessment. I'm not going to ask her to simplify it. Maybe I'll try to do that, but thank you very much, CMO, for that. Essentially, the report says that there were different varieties of mold found, that in a number of cases, these varieties are either not toxic in terms of what they give off, because the mold itself is not the problem, is what it emits in the environment. And in the cases where they were seen to be high concentrated levels, those areas were immediately dealt with, either abandoned, cleaned, or the engaging of experts who would come in to do the mold remediation. The concern I have about all this, which is why I asked the CMO to prepare this report, is because there are discussions out there creating an impression of panic, that the exposure by persons in the building due to the mold discovery is another indication that we have neglected to deal with the situation and by extension expose persons unnecessarily to risk. And this is not true. As was said earlier, once the discovery was made, immediate action was taken. Indeed, action started before because of the discomfort in those areas, the deep cleaning action. But once the discovery was made as it relates to the mold, the presence of mold, immediate action was taken to deal with the situation, either through cleaning, relocation, sealing off, or a combination of all of the above. The other important point to make is that the entire building was not infected by mold. And in areas where mold was identified based on the studies, it varied in terms of variety and in terms of concentration. And that's an important distinction, because the impression is given that once you're on the building, you're exposed. And that is not the case, certainly not what the science has proven from the study. And in those areas where we felt the risk was greatest, appropriate action was taken. And the third point that I discerned from the very in-depth scientific commentary is that mold reacts to persons, to different people, differently, depending on a range of issues. And as a consequence, the response would vary in terms of those reactions. Today I saw in one of the print media a mold expert, independent expert from the University of the West Indies, speaking on the issue. And what I discerned from the discussion in print, and I heard him on the radio also speaking to a particular talk show host, what I discerned from him is that based on the PAHO study which he saw, and by the way, he had gone and looked also with a team in the early days to give us an assessment of the situation. Based on what he saw, the concentrated levels of the particular mold that would be considered toxic would have to be at a particular level in terms of the intake that to run that risk that is being hinted at in terms of the exposure to cancer-causing agents. Now, I am not an expert on the situation, and therefore I try to avoid too much technical commentary on it. I depend on the experts to give me that information. And indeed, what cannot be said is that we did not, at the outset, engage the experts to come in and give us this situation, this information. You know, part of the reason why this discussion is taking place is that we have been very comprehensive in our approach to assessing the problem and to solving the problem, a problem that has existed for a very long time. And indeed, the mold wasn't present only when it was discovered. Chances are it existed in the facility for some time before that. It's just that we have decided to do something about it, and to do something about it in a very comprehensive way. So I really am disappointed in the sort of sensationalization of the issues that has been taking place. The innuendos, the accusations as to, you know, who is engaged in dereliction of duty and neglect, when the reality is we certainly believe that we took a responsible approach to first assessing and understanding the problem and to addressing the issue once that information became available. And we will continue to take that responsible approach in the interest of all stakeholders, in the interest of providing the service and the interest of those who provide the service. And that will be our modus operandi going forward. Okay, I'll stop here if there's...
Right. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, CMO. Comprehensive presentations. Any questions?
CMO. Morning. I wouldn't even attempt to try to
Understand.
touch the surface of some of the things that you raised in your report. But just to deal with a basic issue. We've heard of complaints about persons who were affected by the effects of the mold, whatever that is. Different manifestation, and you have indicated that the mold reacts to people differently. The question is, how can we certify or be able to determine whether over medium or long term persons who have been exposed, whether or not they might not develop probably any serious effects from this exposure?
Right, well, pretty much what we are doing now in terms of the collecting of the information in our staff clinic is really our baseline data that we're collecting, okay? Now, based on this data, okay, and we have contacted experts overseas in occupational health who are going to come here to form a team with some of our local persons. We've already made contact with a dermatologist, an ear, nose, and throat specialist, and a pulmonologist who are willing to assist to look at the data and then to decide which persons would require follow-up based on that data. But in addition to that, the staff clinic is not going to end because we have taken the patients out of the Cornwall Regional Building. The staff clinic is going to continue. Persons have asked, what are the specific regime that is going to be followed? It's difficult to give a specific regime when you have not yet fully analyzed all the data that is there. Okay, so we're going to have to look at the baseline data. What are the common symptoms and what these would indicate, and then to determine what is the follow-up that would be required for those. So we do intend to continue the follow-up, and as I said, for persons who develop chronic problems, We can investigate to find out if there are chronic fungal infections, and we can investigate to find out if there are any levels of any kind of toxins that are there. But as persons move away from the building, we do expect that most of them, their symptoms will resolve, okay? So for those that continue to come to the staff clinic, then we will be able to follow up and investigate those persons.
Minister, some persons have suggested, I can put it no further than a suggestion, that legal action may be taken against the Ministry of the Government regarding this whole affair. Have you received any official communication from those persons?
No. No communication at all.
And how do you plan to approach the matter if in fact they decide to go to the courts regarding
Well,
this?
I mean, my own view on it is that we have and will continue to do all we can to keep persons informed on the issues at hand, to give them the information, to continue to try and resolve the issue in a more sustainable way with the restoration of the facility. To the extent that persons have issues, as was said by the CMO, we take those issues seriously. Already the clinical team would have put some things in place and are expanding that in terms of the baseline and the tracking of persons who may still have issues even after coming out of the building. So we're approaching those persons who have been affected with a clear indication that we care about their well-being. We will apply a very compassionate approach to ensuring that their best interests are served, and the extent to which they require support, that support would be forthcoming. Now, whether legal action or not, I mean, persons have a right to take steps that are in their best interests, and I would not want to discourage persons from doing that. But we will always be there to give support if and when that support is required.
Yes, sir.
I've heard the explanation about what happened over the period of
And you're from where, sir? You're from
Observer.
Observer.
I've heard the explanation of what had happened and what is being done to deal with the matter. But what I haven't heard is what you want from the people who are affected by the situation. What can they do to assist you in the process that you are carrying out to get back there?
The people, all people, you mean? The patients, staff, everybody?
The patients or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think part of our responsibility in all of this as the standard bearers for public health is to ensure that we live true to our duty to preserve important services for the country and for the population that requires it. And I think we have pursued that course, even with the relocation of the services. In so doing, we have to, first of all, provide information, and we have to redouble our efforts to ensure that that information is there. Beyond that, the extent to which those services are unusually provided, unusual meaning in locations which were not normally the case, or in a manner which was not normally the case, maybe a smaller space as opposed to what they're accustomed to. We need to crave their understanding that these are temporary measures. These are measures that we have very little options on. So for example, elective surgeries at Falmouth. People need to know you live in St. James, you have an elective surgery, yes, you're on the list, but Falmouth has to be the place you will have to go to get it. So we certainly hope that persons would be understanding of the situation, and we have an obligation to keep them informed of that situation. That applies to both the medical staff, who have to sometimes change their location to administer their services, the patients, who clearly have to move around for those services, and clearly the administrators who have to manage the process. Now, as it relates to those who are affected, what I would ask those persons to do is to ensure that they use the staff clinic that we have established, because that staff clinic is there for the staff. Now, we have had persons using it when they have issues, and we would like the use of that staff clinic to continue to the extent that issues continue or persist, because that's an important part of trying to understand whether or not there may be longer term implications for persons who have been affected.
Just a follow-up.
You said that December, the end of this year is a sort of target date that you have set to.
Yeah, the end of this year is we're looking to be either complete or substantially complete. And I say substantially complete because I keep making the point that when you're dealing with a brownfield site, a new building, you really sometimes come upon things that you never anticipated. But based on where we are now and what we're doing, we are hoping that we can be certainly well down the wicket towards the end of the year. And we will keep the public informed.
In relation to the staff clinic, just trying to determine how many persons have already attended the clinic, and
Right.
do you expect
Those
to
numbers?
see the numbers growing as we go along?
Well, I think over the 1 year period, we've had over 2,000 visits. No, we don't have 2,000 staff members, right? Visits, okay. As I said, once persons have moved out of the building, I do expect that their symptoms would be resolved for the most part. However, for the persons that we would have identified based on their symptoms as high risk, then we would schedule review appointments for those, okay? But for the persons that continue to use the clinic who come in just experiencing symptoms, then those are to continue. So I do expect that we will have a decrease in the numbers from now because pretty much everybody is off the building.
Any other question?
Nationwide News. Quick question to the Minister, Morning Horizon.
Dr.
Wheatley, a cabinet minister. How is he? What's the latest?
He is now doing some precautionary tests. I went and visited with him at the Andrews Hospital. So for those who don't know, his vehicle flipped over in Portmore this morning, and he is okay on the face of it, speaking and jovial as usual, but just out of an abundance of caution, he is being subjected to some tests to make sure that there's no internal damage anywhere. So for now, we give thanks. And by the way, that applies also to his driver, because his driver was also in the vehicle at the time driving. And both of them are going to be given those sort of precautionary tests. So no obvious external signs of scars or injuries, but just to be sure they're doing the tests for internal possibilities.
Thank you.
Okay.